Hi everybody, this is Craig Tanner for The Mindful Eye and The Daily Critique. Today's image was submitted by Sharon, who's a beginning photographer from Ontario, Canada. And we don't have the metadata on this image, but I know some of the backstory because Sharon recently created this image on the Mindful Eyes Tetons National Park workshop. One of the first things I like about this image is the fact that Sharon is just working with the reflection of the scene and a little bit of a framing device in terms of the subject matter that's around the water in the shot. Sharon didn't go up and get the top part of the scene, which was the mountains themselves, and there's several things that might do for us as landscape photographers. One of the things that it does is it just makes the shot less literal, and in a very popular location like the Tetons, it's a subject that I would call a mature subject, which means that it's been photographed a lot of times and those photographs are out there in a public way. When we don't shoot the scene in a literal way, when we abstract it just a little bit by shooting a part of it, we can actually increase the impact of the image. If a subject's been shot over and over and over again, the viewers can become desensitized to the subject. Another thing that happens in a landscape shot with real strong mountains is that we can end up with a lot of contrast in the top part of the scene that can be hard to balance visually. It can overwhelm everything else in the image. And the other thing about just shooting a part of an image like this and abstracting it in a way just creates a little bit more mystery. It also makes this an image where people can have their own experience with the image. They can at one time sort of question where it is or imagine that they've been to a place like this or that it's their own place. One of the other things I like about this image is just the way my eye moves in this image. And so one of the main points that I want to get across in the critique today is talking about a visual hierarchy in terms of the way different elements of the design of our photographs are weighted. We know from studies, watching people, studying people, looking at photographs and other types of visual media that the eye will generally go first to the area or areas of highest contrast. And we know that the eye will go next to very bright areas in the scene, and next to warm tones, and the warmer the more weight they'll have. So a very dominating warm color like red has a lot of visual power. Next, the mind will go to cool tones and more mid-tones, and last the eye will go to shadow areas that have detail, and the mind's eye will literally skip over areas that are black with no detail. So I just want to talk about that visual hierarchy for another minute. Knowing that this is the way people are moving around in our images can really help us in terms of trying to deal with the idea of balance and unity in our pictures. Obviously, the idea of contrast, very, very important when it comes to photography. And it's not just the difference between light and dark. It can also, in a color photograph, be the difference between warm and cool, like we're seeing here. So a very, very powerful part of this image is over here, where you have values that are dramatically different right next to each other, and you also have colors on the color wheel that are opposites or close to opposites. Very, very powerful. When I look at this image, I'm definitely drawn to this part of the image, but then that's balanced with some nice contrast here and some strong line. I like the framing device of the reflections of the trees coming all the way around to the mountains, and I like the fact that it's framing a texture in here or a layer of information that's interesting. It starts off with the rocks, and then to me a really important part of this composition is actually these circular patterns right here of the ripples on the water. And one of the things I wanted to mention about the backstory of this image is I know that Sharon just picked up a handful of rocks and threw them up in the air to create this pattern, and it really helps the image to me in a couple of ways. You get a strong sense of a circular framing device in this negative space in the image anyway, and these series of concentric circles with the ripples in the water happening over and over again creates a repetition with that idea, so it sets up in an area of the image that may have sort of flattened out where you don't see the rocks as much. It sets up a texture or a pattern that not only creates interest, but it's in harmony with this framing device in the image. It's also just another layer of information. And if if we're working traditionally and we're trying to tell a story, creating depth in the story can be very important for the viewer. And this extra layer of information in the image helps to hold my attention longer, and because it does form a unity or a harmony with the overall framing device, it also works for me just from a purely visual design standpoint. The other thing I like about this image is I like the depth of it in terms of having an understated part or a darker part in the beginning of the image. And not only is this darker, but the values in here are sort of blue, they're cool, and then in the back of the image it gets brighter, and there are a lot of warm tones back here. That really helps to create an illusion of depth from near to far and pulls me all the way back to the very back part of the image, and then I can come back down to the local contrast of the rocks and move through the image again. The only suggestions that I might make for improvement in this image would just be paying attention, if let's say I was going to make a big print of this, is some of the little local contrast in here in the rocks, and just maybe toning some of that down, or maybe healing it out or spot cloning it out to simplify the overall feeling of moving through the image. But overall, this is an image that I enjoy quite a bit. I love the way my eye moves. I like the color. I like the different textures and layer of information, and I like the depth that I'm feeling when I look at this image. And we want to thank Sharon for submitting this image to the Mindful Eyes Daily Critique.